What's up guys, welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host Caleb. The goal with this video is to create a comprehensive list of the cards that we want to put in the 99 of the commanders that we already love, and it's going to feature all of the new BLOOMBURROW cards. So if you like this, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe because I am testing this new longer form content where I read out the cards. It's going to be very palatable to listen to, so I'm going to test something out here and you guys can let me know how you like it in the comments down below. With that being said, if you guys want to support this channel, you can click on that whatnot link in the description down below. You'll get a free $15 whenever you sign up, so it's going to help you out as well, and you'll also be supporting the channel. Additionally, I want to shout out my high contributing patrons, Newsome and Irrelevant. You guys rock. Now, let's get right into the cards that we're going to add, and we're going to separate this by color, and we're going to start with black. Now, Darkstar Augur is a very interesting card. It's kind of like a Dark Confidant, but it has Offspring, and Offspring is a new ability from BLOOMBURROW. It says you may pay an additional cost as you cast the spell. If you do, when the spell enters the battlefield or when this creature enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 token copy of it. And then Darkstar Augur says at the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. You lose life equal to its mana value. So it's going to be very good in those decks that gain a lot of life, and also those decks that like to pay a lot of life, like your Villas Broker of Bloods or anything that benefits from us just having a very low life total. So that's going to be very notable there as well. The next card we're going to talk about is Rottenmouth Viper. Now this one reads 5 and a black. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may sacrifice any number of non-land permanents. This spell costs 1 generic less to cast for each permanent sacrificed this way. So we can essentially get it down to only costing 1 black if we sacrifice 5 creatures, and it is a 6/6, so that's pretty notable here. Whenever Rottenmouth Viper enters or attacks, put a blight counter on it. Then for each blight counter on it, each opponent loses 4 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. So right out of the gate, I think this is going to be pretty decent in Jund decks that like to go wide and love extra combat steps, or just Jund sacrifice strategies that like to keep reanimating creatures in and out of the graveyard and want creatures to die, because this sacrifices our creatures so we can get value off of them, and then it gives us an ETB that gives us value as well. So that's just going to be something to think about, and it's also basically a 1-drop that can hit somebody for 6, so that's notable as well, especially when we're playing our greater good effects in those Jund strategies. Now, moving on to our last black card, we have Season of Loss. There is a whole cycle of these, and they're all pretty interesting. They say choose up to 5 paw prints. Paw prints are energy, as I understand it, so it's just a resource you can spend as you're casting this spell. So it's going to give you 5 of these paw prints to cast, and then you get to choose up to 3 modes, and you can choose them more than once. The first mode is each player sacrifices a creature. So on its face, this card is 5 mana. You can make everybody sacrifice 5 creatures. That's going to be pretty useful in those decks that want you to sacrifice or want to force your opponents to sacrifice their creatures, and decks that make you want to sacrifice your own creatures as well. So you can kind of it's kind of like a pseudo board wipe, honestly. And then additionally, for 2 paw prints, you can draw a card for each creature you control that died this turn. And then for 3 paw prints, you can have each opponent lose X life, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So this is just a very flexible card that, again, is going to be very good in those edict strategies. It's going to give you some card advantage. It's a little bit of removal, and honestly, it's a really flexible card for 5 mana that I'm probably going to be testing out. Now, moving on to blue, we have Doorport Mage. This card reads 1 generic and a blue. Whenever 1 or more other creatures you control leave the battlefield without dying, draw a card. So instantly, I'm thinking your blink strategies. We're already in blue. It's already easy to blink our creatures. So if you already have a blink deck, this is basically just going to put, hey, whenever you blink this creature, draw a card on all of your cards that you're blinking. So it's going to be very good there. It also has a tap ability for 1 generic and a blue. Return another target creature you control to its owner's hand. So again, this really tells me it wants to be in a blink strategy, because now we can take our ETB creatures, return them back to our hand, and cast them again. So this is just a very good, useful cards for those blink strategies, and I think it's going to see a decent amount of play. Fortune Teller's Talent. Now, this is basically in the deck just because I thought this is going to be amazing for Kellen, but let me read it off to you guys. For the first talent, you can, or this is one of those level up enchantment cards, you may look at the top card of your library anytime, okay? And then for 4 mana, as long as you've cast a spell this turn, you may play cards from the top card of your library. And then for the next level, it's actually less, it's only 3 mana, so for a total of 7 mana, you can get this to its max level, and it says spells you cast from anywhere other than your hand cost 2 less to cast. Now, why I think this is going to be amazing in Kellen the Kid specifically is this is a kind of a deck that wants to cast spells from anywhere other than your hand, right? So whether it's the graveyard, whether it's the top of your library, it's going to get reduced, and additionally, it's going to allow you to cast spells from the top of your library. So not only is this card an enabler for the strategy, it's also reduces the cost. So it does the job of 2 cards in one, but you're just going to have to pay for it. So you're basically paying the cost of 2 cards, but it only takes up 1 card slot in your library. So that's going to be very useful. And then again, if you have Sensei's Divining Top on top of your library, you can just draw your deck in Kellen and throw all your lands into play. So I just thought I'd mention that one. Polywog Prodigy. Now, I think this one's going to be very good in CEDH strategies, depending on what is in the command zone, because it says evolve. So whenever a creature enters in with more power, we're going to go ahead and put a 1/1 counter on it. And then it's 1 generic and a blue, so only 2 mana, and then it's a 1/3. So a 2/2 is going to evolve this into 2 power, and then it says, whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell with mana value less than Polywog Prodigy's power, draw a card. So again, very powerful in those CEDH decks. We can very easily get 2 power on this guy depending on what is in our command zone, and then once we do that, we're essentially going to draw a card for every counter spell because they're all 1 CMC, every mana rock, you know, it's just going to draw a ton of cards, and it's going to be like another Rhystic Study. Now, in the casual side of things, I would only be playing this in decks that can really buff it up very efficiently and very quickly. Your 1/1 counter strategies that move counters onto other creatures and such and things like that, right? And then it's going to be an insane card advantage engine, but you just have to ensure that you can get it big enough to get the benefit off of it, if that makes sense. Moving on, we have another level up card. We have Storm Chaser's Talent. Now, when Storm Chaser's Talent enters the battlefield, you get a 1/1 blue and red otter creature token with prowess. Pretty decent there, right? And then when this class becomes level 2, return target instant and sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. That's going to cost 4 mana, kind of high costed here. And then for 6 mana, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/1 blue and red otter creature token with prowess. So this is basically a Monastery Monk in mono blue. You do have to level it up, but I'm probably playing this in Izzet strategies that are playing a lot of rituals. That way my rituals get me enough mana to level this up, and then after I level it up, I'm able to storm off and create a lot of those 1/1 blue otter creature tokens that have prowess and just get massive. So that's why this guy is going to be included on my list. Then we have Volley Food Caller. This is a 2 generic and 1 blue for a flash creature otter wizard. You may cast non-creature spells as though they had flash, and then whenever you cast a non-creature spell, birds, frogs, otters, rats you control get 1/1 until end of turn. Untap them. Now, this is kind of just in the deck because I'm probably going to, or in the list because I'm probably going to try to make a jank deck where we allow all of our creatures to tap for mana, and then you can make a crazy storm list out of this, right? Because whenever you cast a spell, you tap your otters, you tap your fishes, your rats, your frogs, right? And then you cast a spell, untap them all, and that's going to give you mana to cast another spell. Kind of jank, but kind of fun in the same, right? So I thought I'd just include it. And then it also does give all of your non-creature spells flash, so it's also pretty useful for that as well. Season of Weaving. Again, this is one of those cycle cards that gives you the 5 paw prints, and then you get to spin those. So for 1 paw print, you can draw a card. So this just says, hey, 6 mana, draw a card. And then for 2 paw prints, choose an artifact creature you control, create a token copy of it. So you can even draw 3 cards and then create 2 token copies of something. Still pretty good, still very flexible here. And then for 3 paw prints, return each non-land, non-token permanent to its owner's hand. So it's also a board wipe. Again, these cycles are actually very flexible, and I'm going to be trying them out in a plethora of decks just because of how flexible they are. I really like the design of these, and again, the bang for the buck here is kind of crazy. Moving on to green, my first favorite one is Evercoat Ursine. No idea if I'm saying that right, but it's 4 generic and a green, so 5 mana. It has trample and hideaway 3, hideaway 3. So you get to look 3 cards deep, hide away one of those cards, and then you get to do that again. And then it says whenever Evercoat your scene deals combat damage to a player, if there are cards exiled with it, you may play one of them without paying their mana cost. Now, instantly, I think of green decks that want to play a lot of high CMC creatures, and maybe we pair that with red for some extra combat steps, because again, if we can hit multiple players with this, this is just going to allow us to cheat all of those hideaway cards into play. Then we can take it one step farther and again, maybe include it in a Jund deck, and then we're sacrificing this guy for value because he's a 6/5, and then reanimating him to get the hideaway abilities again. So there's a lot of flexibility with this guy, and at the end of the day, he's going to generate a lot of value if we can connect. Now, I do like pairing him with red at least, because giving this guy haste is going to be massive. Now, for all of you Defender lovers out there, we have Fecund Greenshell. Now, this guy is a 5 CMC turtle, 3 generic, 2 green, reach. As long as you control 10 or more lands, creatures you control get +2/+2. So he's a little bit of an anthem, and +2/+2 anthems are pretty decent. And then whenever Fecund Greenshell or another creature you control with toughness greater than its power enters, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land, you may put it into the battlefield tapped, otherwise put it into your hand. So it's basically just a Defender tribal card that's going to allow you to draw cards or put lands into play whenever those Defender creatures enter the battlefield, which I love effects like that because it's kind of like you get to play additional lands while drawing cards, and it keeps all of your draws live because it's keeping all of the lands off the top of your deck. It's just a very good strategy and a very good card in a strategy that's kind of stormy anyway, right? It's very easy to cast a ton of Defender cards and just go off, so this guy's going to be very welcome here. We also have Thickest in the Thicket. First of all, W name. I love the name on this card. And then when it enters the battlefield, or it's an enchantment, sorry, for 3 generic and 5 colored, whenever it enters the battlefield, you get to put X 1/1 counters on target creature, where X is that creature's power. So right out of the gate, it's going to double one of our creature's power. And then at the beginning of that end step, draw 2 cards if you control the creature with the greatest power or are tied for the greatest power. So it's going to be card advantage that doubles our creature's power. Not the worst thing, not the best thing, but at the end of the day, it's going to be solid, consistent card advantage in those power matter strategies, and it's going to double power. So in stuff like Ghalta, that's just going to be a 24/24 dino that's going to hit people for lethal. Just something to think about in those commanders that are already massive, like Yorgul and Multani, right? So yeah, I think this one's going to see play, but it's going to be in those niche power matter strategies. Moving on, we have Agate Instigator. Now we're moving on to red. Now this one I think is going to see a lot of plays because it already looks like some game-ending cards, but it has Offspring. Now this is 1 generic and a red, and then it has Offspring for 1 generic and a red. And it says whenever another creature you control enters, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent, right? So it's like impact trimmers, but you get 2 of them, and then you have a token copy of it. Once you have a token copy of a creature in red, that's extremely abusable. You can use your populate effects. There's a ton of new cards that specifically say create a token copy of a token. So now you're able to create more token copies of it. And it also is abusable if you can return this back to your hand and cast it again and use its Offspring ability again. So again, a lot of utility with this card, and it's just going to kill some tables. So definitely look out for this one. Another one I'm going to test out is Alchemist's Talent. Now we all know treasure tokens are very powerful, and this card is just kind of a, let's say, 6 mana cannon in red, which is kind of worth it. It's going to allow, or it says, whenever Alchemist Talent enters the battlefield, create 2 tapped treasure tokens. So right out of the gate, it's going to give you 2 tapped treasure tokens, and it does cost 3 generic and a red. So it kind of costs 2 mana because it's going to refund 4. But then if you level it up, it says treasure tokens you control have sacrificed this artifact, add 2 mana of any 1 color. So as long as we spend 2 more mana, 6, it's going to give us 4 mana instead because again, we had those tapped treasure tokens. And then for its final ability, it says whenever you cast a spell, if mana from a treasure was spent to cast this spell, this class deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to each opponent. So that's going to be the solid game ender in this Strategy. You can generate a ton of treasure tokens. Then when you're casting spells with those treasure tokens, you're dealing damage to each opponent. It's kind of like, what is that? A passionate archaeologist, but for treasure tokens, which is going to be extremely broken. And this can be a win con in a plethora of decks that use treasure tokens like Corvold, Prosper. I mean, literally any treasure token deck. I think putting this in the deck as a win con, especially in casual, is going to be viable. Moving on to artist talents. I love the talents in this cycle. They all do pretty good things. I love cards in general that can fuel multiple card slots in a deck that are just one card. I mean, like, let's take Alchemist talent for instance. It's a little bit of ramp, and then it doubles our ramp, that is treasure tokens, and then it's a game ender. So again, it's fueling 3 different strategies for the same deck in one card. So those are the cards that really give you the bang for your buck when you're deck building, and they kind of just lend it to, like, the longer the game goes, the more setup you're going to be versus your opponents. So that's why I love these classes right here. Whenever you cast this is one generic and then a red. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Kind of crazy, right? You're going to loot every time you cast a non-creature spell. And then you can level it up for 2 generic and a red, so 3 mana. Non-creature spells you cast cost 2 less, or 1 less to cast, sorry. So that's going to be insane in your Joyra, whether like Captain decks that just want to storm off, cast a ton of artifacts, or even in your Storm lists, right? There's a lot of Storm cards that benefit off of having instant and sorcery cards in the graveyard. So you can play this, level it up, your instant and sorcery spells are going to cost less, and then you're going to get to loot every time you cast an instant or sorcery spell. That's kind of massive. And then again, for those artifact storm strategies, it's insane as well. But let's move on to level 3. Again, this is 2 generic and a red, so 3 more mana to level up. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage +2 instead. This is again kind of lending to the fact that I think this wants to be a storm list, so now your lightning bolt's still 5 damage instead of 3, and it also works with artifacts because there's a lot of artifacts that enter the battlefield and deal damage as well. So either way, I think this slots perfectly into a storm strategy that cares about having those specific types in the graveyard, which we all know instant and sorceries and then artifact decks as well both love doing. Moving on to Calamity of Cinders. Now, this is a token strategy for sure because this costs 7 mana, 5 generic and 2 red, but it has Convoke. And remember guys, I know people get confused, but Convoke can be free if you have 7 creatures. You just have to ensure that 2 of those 7 creatures are red, because when you tap 2 red creatures using Convoke, you can actually use them to pay for red mana. Something I see a lot of confusion about. People think you can only get rid of the generic cost. That's not the case. You can actually get rid of the colored pips as well, as long as those creatures have the same color. Now, Calamity of Cinders deals 6 damage to each untapped creatures, or each untapped creature. So you basically tap down your entire board, except for maybe 7 creatures, or maybe 7 creatures is your entire board. You tap all of them to Convoke, and then you basically have a one-sided board wipe, which token strategies need and love. Otherwise, board wipes are just going to set token strategies back to the Stone Age. So this is probably just going to be another amazing token strategy board wipe that you guys can abuse. Moving on, we have Prosperous Bandit. This guy has Offspring. He's 2 generic and a red, so 3 mana overall. He has Offspring 1 mana, so for 4 mana, for 4 mana, I don't know why that was so hard. You get a first striker that says whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens, and then you can have 2 of them, right? So this instantly tells me I want to be playing this in a deck that buffs up my creatures, buffs up all my small creatures, makes them big. That way I can make a ton of treasure tokens. Now the problem is they have balanced, or they're kind of being willy-nilly with what they balance and what they hit with the tap treasure token text, but this card did sadly get hit with the tap treasure token text, but it's probably a good reason, because if not, extra combat steps would be crazy with this guy. Once he started getting bigger, you could almost start generating more mana than you needed, like the Reaver Cleaver, and just pay for more additional extra combat steps. So if you're in treasure token strategies, or you're in strategies that sacrifice artifacts, this is probably the guy for you. Or just affinity strategies that care about having artifacts on the battlefield. And then if you equip like a Nettlecyst to this guy, you're really cooking. Let's move on. We have Storm Splitter. I think this is going to be one of the best cards in the deck. And guys, it is only $2.52 right now. So I would suggest at least picking up a copy for any of your Storm lists. This guy is 3 generic and a red, and he has haste. Haste is very notable here because this card says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a token that's a copy of Storm Splitter. Exile those tokens at the beginning of the next end step. What this is this is a storm or spell slinger Scute Swarm. Every time you cast a spell, boom, you've got 2 Storm Splitters. Next spell, 4 Stone Splitters. And then the next spell, you're going to get you're going to get 8 Stone Splitters. Gets massive very quickly. This guy's a 1/4, and yeah, he's just going to populate the board, and he's going to really fuel those storm strategies. Moving on, we have the cycle card, Season of the Bold. This has, again, create 5 of those paw prints, then you can pay the paw prints. The first one is 1 paw print, create a tap treasure token. Notably, this is a sorcery, so you can't do it at instant speed. If this was instant speed, it'd be better, because it's just 5 mana, create 5 treasure tokens. That's pretty good, right? But yeah, tap treasure token, probably not looking at that very much. For 2 paw prints, you can exile the top 2 cards of your library until end of turn, or end of your next turn. You may play those cards. I like that it says end of your next turn, because if we choose that mode twice, we're going to exile the top 4 cards of our library. So this is some very solid card advantage in red, honestly. It's all impulse draw, so you will have to inevitably let some of those cards go, but it's still very good, and it does synergize with the tap treasure tokens, because we can even choose 3 paw prints to create 3 tap treasure tokens and then exile the top 2 cards of our library, and we kind of get a mini Jessica's Will that's way worse, but it's still a mini Jessica's Will. Okay, and then the last ability says, until the end of your next turn, whenever you cast a spell, Season of the Bold deals 2 damage to up to 1 target creature. So there you go, it's a little bit of removal as well. Let's move on to white. We don't have much white cards here, but they're pretty solid. The first one is, again, another class, and it's 2 generic and a white. Whenever 1 or more tokens you control enters, draw a card. This ability only triggers once. So this is probably going to be very cheap card advantage in those mono white decks, so get it while it's good. Then for 1 white, when this class becomes level 2, create a token that's a copy of another target token you control. So there we go. We're able to create another target token. So this is kind of one of those cards that if we're able to create a token copy of it, it becomes very powerful, because we're able to create token copies of it using itself. Does that make sense? Kind of like the 3 blind mice story that goes insane if you can create a token copy of this. This does the same thing, but for card advantage. So in your decks that want to make token copies of enchantments, I would consider this. And then for token decks overall, because then for 3 generic and a white, creature tokens you control get +2/+2. So kind of solid there, a little bit of an anthem. Jacked Rabbit, very good for these Power Matter strategies. First of all, it has Ravenous, which I love Ravenous in X spells, but let's get into the cost of this. It's X, 1, and a white, and then Ravenous says if X is 5 or more, draw a card. So this can replace itself if you cast it for enough. And then whenever Jacked Rabbit attacks, create a number of 1/1 White Rabbit creature tokens equal to Jacked Rabbit's power. What I like about this is it's an attack trigger, not a combat damage trigger. So whether you connect or not, Jacked Rabbit is still going to create those 1/1 white creature tokens. But what I like about these cards is I like putting them in strategies that want to buff our creatures up anyway. That way we can cast this for 2 mana and it's already a 1/2, and then we can easily go ahead and just start buffing it up and making, you know, a lot of rabbits. Moving on, we have Starfield Invocation. Now, this one has gift a card, so you do have to give up some value, but it says destroy all creatures. If this gift was promised, return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield under your control. So you're able to basically save your biggest piece. And this is only a 5 mana board wipe, so if you have like a 6 mana creature on the battlefield, it's already worth it to go ahead and give that gift, and then you're just going to reanimate something like a Sun Titan, and then maybe Sun Titan reanimate something else that dies. So this is another board wipe in white that actually gives you value from wiping the entire board out. And then again, we have the cycle card with Season of the Burrow. This says choose up to 5 paw prints worth of modes, and then the first one is create a white creature token. Again, this is 5 mana for 3 generic and 2 white. They're all the same. And so we can make 5 rabbit creature tokens with this. Not terrible. The next mode is 2 paw prints, exile target non-land permanent, and controller draws a card. So we can exile 2 permanents and make a rabbit token. Not terrible as well. And then for 3 paw prints, we can return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield with an indestructible counter on it. That's the one I'm kind of interested in, especially if your commander only costs 3 mana. So you can bring your commander back with indestructible. I'm definitely going to probably slot this into my Balin deck. Sadly, it got spoiled after I built it. Sometimes that happens, but I like to get the videos to you guys as fast as possible. So yeah, let me know what you guys think about this video overall. That's going to end it for the cards I wanted to talk about in the 99. If this video gets enough love, I will talk about the commanders, and I'm going to talk about them from a perspective of putting them in the 99 because I don't want to talk about each individual commander and how I'd build it. But if you guys want that as well, maybe you can put that in the comments down below. I'm just looking for a lot of feedback. If you guys have been following me for a while and you're loving this form of content, I really need to know. With that being said, I would like to thank my high contributing patrons, or my patrons in general: Newsome, Irrelevant, Chicken Salad, Creator, and Excessum. You guys rock, as well as everybody else. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I hope this helped you in your deck building endeavors, and I will see you guys in the next one.